Hey everyone, it's the only man to have never thrown a strike in Wii Bowling and head of Sandbox development, Phil from Alpacadabraz. I'm here to show you how to take the assets we've been tweaking in VoxEdit, export them as a 3D file called a GLTF, and import that file into LightTracer. In LightTracer, we'll do a custom render with changes of lighting and floor and matching a background, and this will be really helpful for those of you who are looking to connect your Paca models with other photos or to create some memeable content. So hopefully this video will be interesting and helpful. Hey everybody, we are going to start in VoxEdit today, then end up in LightTracer to put together a really simple but fun way to show off your 3D Paca. So I know we went through and added a custom animation. I imagine at this point you may have added your own custom nodes, whether those are, I think we talked about wings or a helmet or a mustache or whatever it is you added. You want to be able to extract that file, the updated file, as a GLTF and show it off. Now the good news is if you decided not to do anything, if you want to just keep your Paca exactly as it is, great. The GLTF file is already provided to you. You're going to have it ready to go. And fast forward to the part in this video where we jump into LightTracer, and this will apply. But I want to show real quickly, if you did make changes to your Paca, the GLTF file that was on the website is no longer going to reflect. It's going to reflect the original one. So here's how we very easily export that. So we've got our guy, Steve. Take a look. He's got his sad animation. If you remember, he's really upset that he never learned to play piano and a single tear drops out of his eye. Well, I want to capture that sadness in a still image. So really simple here in VoxEdit. Doesn't matter what we've got selected at this point. If we're going to VoxEdit, if you're going to Blender, it's something else. But we'll talk about LightTracer first. We're going to export GLTF. Find a place for it, right? I've got a file right now that has Steve Wilberry's GLTF, right, under my VoxEdit folder. I'm going to save this. It's going to ask me if I want to overwrite it. Yes, I mean, in this case, I'm overwriting a file that I had just tried minutes ago, but don't overwrite your original. If you do, you can always go back to the site and re-download it, but I recommend saving a separate file. Okay, cool. So this part of the process is done. We have exported our new model as a GLTF. File, export GLTF. We are going to leave VoxEdit and then pick this back up when I am in LightTracer. Okay, we're back, and now we are in LightTracer. So this is a free program, and I think some of the free features are limited, but what we're doing today should fall within the bounds of the free level of use. I know they actually have a really, really slick version of this on the web, so you don't have to even download the separate program. Their web version works really, really well. So what we're going to do here is we are going to drop our GLTF file into the space and replace the current one. This is sort of the test default asset in LightTracer that helps you, just to sort of test things out. So we don't want this piece. It's a very cool object, but not important to us. I am going to find my GLTF folder. Steve Wilberry is right here. I drop him in, and the question is, do you want to replace, do you want to add, or do you want to cancel? And so when add is really important is if you're going to put multiple Pacas or multiple anything into a scene, you want to add. It means that not only will this center ball stay here, but it'll add Steve to it. But in this case, you want to replace. We want just Steve. And so here is our Paca. He's looking great, right? The lighting's a little intense right in this scene, but we'll kind of get to that in a second. And LightTracer imports all, these are your VXMs basically, right? Your body, your neck, your head. I'm going to just rename this as Steve. And so this is Steve. And along this window is the sort of scene itself, the materials, if you're going to add some additional light setups, and then camera. And so this camera thing we will use here in a second, but at this point where we want to focus on is the scene objects. And we're going to go down to the environment. So right now we have an HDRI that was sort of the default. Under the library on the other side, you can pull the windows up by clicking this arrow. We're going to want to go through and just make some tweaks to settings. So the first one is making sure that, if you've got the paid version, I think watermarks can be set to none. You may have to have a watermark if you're not using the paid version, but I set watermark to none. That just is the logo in the bottom corner of this image. I like 16 by 9 feels good for what we're going to do. Obviously, if you're going to do a square or something else, then fit your dimensions appropriately. But for what the picture that I'm going to use here, 16 by 9 is great. And I think that the fast quality is more than enough for what we're doing. Now, obviously, if you were doing like a car and you needed the nuances of the light hitting paint and the depth of that paint and all these light sources, upping the quality here is really, really important. The good news is for the voxel work that we do, fast will render out the scene much more quickly and will save you some time. And so with that said, at the bottom down here under the back plate, you have a couple options, right? And so you can set it to transparent, which means, and this is really great if you're going to drop this into a picture elsewhere, right? Like you're going to use Photoshop and put your Paca in a scene that's already built. Or if you want to use it like in a PowerPoint presentation or somewhere else where a transparent background is important. Just make sure if you're going on transparent, you save it as a PNG. JPEGs don't have transparent background, so if you're wondering why your background is set to transparent but it doesn't look that way, when you go to export the image, just make sure to save it as a PNG. You can set a gradient, and these gradients are really nice for showing off your Paca. And I think, a trick that people sometimes forget that's subtle and helpful is add a floor to your scene. Because right now, Steve is floating in limbo. So if I click on the plus sign right here, this gives me some options about adding different shapes and things like that. What I want to do is I want to add a model stand. And I just want to add a square floor. And you'll see as soon as I click on this, a shadow is going to show up underneath Steve. And suddenly, instead of floating in the air, Steve now is in a space, right? Like he is now part of the environment, and that goes a long way in sort of selling this as a real thing. Now you can change the gradient to all sorts of colors, right? And depending on what your scene looks like, you can probably do some I know you can do some really cool effects here. We're not going to mess with gradients. We're actually going to import a custom background. And so I've got one already set up here called Excited Lady. I found this picture on a stock library site, right? And so it's just a random stock image, and I thought she looked way too excited for her own good, and so I thought she'd be the perfect person to use for our image. And so I am just navigating around this space, and it might be a little bit confusing because it's still that same big empty 3D space. She's just the background there. And so a couple things you can do with this. One, you could potentially have her sort of pointing to your Paca. You've got that ground floor there, and it kind of looks like she's, hey, check this guy out, right? And this would be actually a really nice little render. Maybe give it a little bit of the corner. And I'm moving by just clicking the left or the right mouse button, depending on what movement I want to make, right? And holding that mouse button and dragging around. The middle mouse button, kind of like in VoxEdit, moves the camera up or down, not connected to the asset, and by holding the mouse button, I'm rotating around that asset left and right. So ultimately, I think something like this, where you've got a little too high. Maybe I like it better if he's facing her. I want a little bit. You always want a little bit of, for 3D assets, you want a little bit of the edge showing, right? And then you can use the scroll wheel to get closer and further away. So I like the eye. So I don't hate that. That would be a pretty decent image to post to Twitter of like, look at the Paca that I made, right? And so I would go and I'd let this green bar go across. I'm running with a 3060 Ti, so it's a relatively fast video card. Those of you who maybe have a slower card, this might take a minute or so for this green bar to go across the screen. But once it's finished, we'll go to export scene. And this you could save as a JPEG, right? At the end of the day, then this file is ready to go. You could post it to Twitter. But I want to do something a little bit different here, and I want to highlight that animation that we put together. Now, you can actually capture full animations, and so we could set the sad animation here. This is the length of the animations, 8 seconds, right? And how long do we want our video length? Well, these two things happen to line up, and so you want our sad to play just once, and if you were to hit play on this, in theory, the tears should happen. The head would move, this would loop, and the final render is obviously not going to have some of these shadows. This is the sort of as it's running render. These are what the frames would look like, but you could have this tear fall and have her sitting there smiling, and run this out as a video, right, and then turn it into a GIF or something else. In this case, though, I want just a still image, and so I have set our animation. And if you're having trouble figuring out, well, why can't I see the animations? If you're set on the wrong object, right, like if I'm set the scene floor, you're not going to see when you click on animations, you're not going to see the animations. So make sure you're clicking on not part of Steve, like just Steve's head isn't going to be right. Click on all of Steve, and then you can pick the animations from, and actually, as I'm looking at this, a funny idea would be dead Steve, right, laying on the ground, and this lady laughing. So this to me is a very is a silly enough image that I think it would work, right? And the floor looks like it's a little bit a little low. You can see the shadow. I would actually, in this case, bring the floor up a little bit so that it's touching. You kind of see the difference of where that shadow lands, right? If the floor is too far, it looks like Steve is floating. I literally just clicked on the floor, and you can see this dotted line around the outside that shows that I've got the floor selected, and I'm moving that up until it kind of feels right. So this is a little bit dark, but there is dead Steve and this woman pointing and smiling. But like I said, at the end of the day, I want to highlight the animation that we made as a group, this sad tear image, and I want to just get one single frame. So I'm going to go back and choose that sad image. I am once again just rotating, holding down the mouse buttons, and moving my camera around to different places. And I am going to zoom in a little bit. And so the floor matters less. Really, the trick to this is matching the lighting. So if you look at her and you look at Steve, I think one thing that I'm seeing is that there's some warmer light on her, some kind of oranges and reds, and there's a very blue tint, especially in the whites. And she's more white balanced than Steve. His eyes have got kind of a bluish look. So we've got the wrong HDRI. There's the wrong light in this scene. So if I go under library, you can see all of these HDRIs. And these are different lighting setups, right? Like where someone has captured an image and captured the light in that image to recreate something that feels very natural. So I'm going to go and let's look at what we got right now. Right now we are, looks like a kind of panorama outdoor. Overcast light is almost always better than direct sunlight. For renders, there's a few exceptions when you're trying to match something where it is clearly in the direct sun, but sort of a overcast image is always going to work better. And so I think this is the one that's in there right now. Let's take a look at this one. A little better. I'm moving Steve down so that their eye lines and the top of their head, there's a little bit of the top of her head showing right at the angle that they're at. But this one is not quite, the exposure is a little bit too low. I'm going to look at some of the studio lighting because she obviously was shot in a studio against a green screen. That looks better. So let's try another one. Maybe a little overexposed. I think this is the winner here. Once again, I'm just clicking through these. Now, ooh, maybe that one. And so if you find like the color temperature of the light is good, but maybe the intensity is too high, you can adjust that in LightTracer. So under the environment tab, there's the power scale button. And so this is set roughly to 1. You know, I could turn this down to half of it and suddenly he's in, you know, a much darker place. Probably thinking about his piano teacher would be my guess. I'll turn it down just a little bit. And the contrast needs to be bumped a little. And so the goal, all I'm doing is sort of looking, I'm going to go into the settings of the scene and I'm going to look at the contrast here. I'm going to turn up the contrast just a little. Not too much. It doesn't take much with contrast to mess it up, and turn up the light just a little to like just under 1. Let's see how that looks. Light needs to be down just a little. These are things that you trial and error. Like there's actually probably is some science behind it, but I like the trial and error approach. He's still underlit. I'm gonna turn up the lights a little bit, and take your head, lean back sometimes and take a look at it. I think that helps. There's some front light here, so I'm going to rotate this, and you can see as I rotate it, the shadows change and kind of give you a sense of where the light's going. And in this, in particular, if you look down in that bottom corner, sort of where my picture is right now, you can see some shadows popping up. You want the light to sort of hit his face in a way that better matches hers. Let's see, where are we going to be? That's interesting. I don't hate this. So I might pump up the light just a little. And like I said, this is trial and error. I feel like Bob Ross here, right? Like you just kind of go at it, do your best. All right, now we are going to shift this, and to add a little humor to this scene, we're going to go to animation. We are going to go to sad, and we are going to pick the scene where his head is down. I'm also going to move his body a little bit so it really looks like his head is, like he is sad. Push him in a little. And I'm moving this animation tab just a little bit. The tear is about to fall. So I kind of like this. It is this lady, she's laughing at... Oh, and you know what? Body language is great too. So if we push Steve's body language so that he is sort of facing away from her, by just rotating him slightly, it definitely gives the feeling of separation between the two characters, right? So she's sort of laughing at him, and he is crying. And I like being able to see both eyeballs, the black parts of the eyes, so that's why you see me making these little tweaks here to the composition. All right, great. So maybe he needs to be a little bit bigger and a little taller. So her fingers are sort of pointing at him. And that's about the size of an alpaca. Maybe he's a little bit smaller. So there you go. So I love this scene. I think it's perfect. I think it captures Steve's sadness. It captures how cruel life can be. And I want this as something I want to post on my Twitter. So really simply, file, export scene, JPEG, PNG. At this point, it doesn't matter. We don't have a transparent background that we need. And save this, right? And so once it's saved, you'll have the ability to post it to Twitter and tag us, please. Hashtag... I gotta come up with something clever. I should have thought of that before I started the video. At very least, at Alpacadabraz and at me, Warehouse Phil, on Twitter, and we'll repost these as you make them. But the sillier, the stranger, the funnier, find ways to take those 3D Pacas and put some emotion into them. I'd love to see those, and I think we would love to highlight them. So there you go. Welcome to LightTracer. I think we'll do another video at some point in the future on Blender and some of the animations you've seen, but for now, this is an easy way to highlight your Paca.